Before we get started, I have a quick favor. I've been self-funding the Finding Genius podcast for 5 years now. I've done over 3,000 episodes. And as you can see on YouTube, we're up over 1 million views on the channel, which is fantastic. The next thing I really want to push on is to get up to 10,000 subscribers. Because once we do, we'll be able to put a donate button and we'll be able to solicit donations to help keep the podcast running and to also get the Finding Genius Foundation moving along. We have a big project studying anxiety, depression, and PTSD and working on a product to help people overcome these problems because I've seen them explode recently after the last 2 years of the whole virus situation. So if you would, please subscribe to the podcast. That would help us tremendously. Give us a thumbs up and check in the description for Buy Me a Coffee. It's about $5. If you could buy me a coffee, I'd really appreciate it. It would help keep the channel going, and I love coffee. Thank you.
Forget frequently asked questions.
Common sense, common knowledge, or Google.
How about advice from a real genius? 95% of people in any profession are good enough to be qualified and licensed. 5%
go above and beyond.
They become very good at what they do, but only
0.1%
are real geniuses. Richard Jacobs has made it his life's mission to find them for you. He hunts down and interviews geniuses in every field: sleep science, cancer, stem cells, ketogenic diets, and more. Here come the geniuses. This is the Finding Genius Podcast
with Richard Jacobs.
Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Finding Genius Podcast. My guest today is Claire Hoffman. She's the author of a book called Sister Sinner, The Miraculous Life and Mysterious Disappearance of Aimee Semple McPherson. And I was telling her offline that, I get books sometimes from guests, and thank you, by the way, Claire, for sending it. This one, my wife grabbed like the first day and reading it immediately. She loves it, so, that's good news. But I haven't read it yet. Apologies, but we can still ask good questions about it, I think. We'll go through all that stuff. But welcome, Claire. Thanks for coming.
Thank you so much for having me, and thanks to your wife. I like that vote of confidence.
So what do you do full time? Are you an author full time, or do other stuff? This is a side project?
I'm an author full time, I would say. I spent about 6 years on this book. I mean, what is full time? I was doing other things during that same time period, including, living through a pandemic with young children. But yeah, I am a writer and a journalist. And yeah, I used to work in newspapers and worked in magazines, and now I've kind of moved into book writing.
Okay. So is this your first book?
This is my second book. My first book is called Greetings from Utopia Park, Surviving a Transcendent Childhood, and it's a kind of mashup of two genres in that it's an investigative memoir. So it's a reported memoir on the Transcendental Meditation movement, which was the religious community that I grew up in the 1980s in Iowa.
Ooh. Is it okay to ask a few questions about that, sir?
For sure. I love talking about it.
Was it a healthy environment in the aggregate, or was it like a secret cult, or what?
Kind of somewhere in between. I sort of joke that I just say new religious movement, but, the Transcendental Meditation movement today is something really different than it was in the 1980s. Today, it's something that has kind of become much more mass, and David Lynch became their sort of primary evangelist until he passed away this January. But, it's something that you hear a lot of celebrities talk about and CEOs, and it's really been kind of stripped down to the basic meditation, mantra-based meditation that they teach. But when I was growing up in the 80s, it was kind of an insular community. Our guru, Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, was still alive, and he really kind of controlled the ideology, I would say. So I went to the Maharishi School of the Age of Enlightenment, and I had my meditations graded, and the majority of graded, yeah. And I didn't do what
you're not manifesting hard enough.
Exactly.
What's wrong with you?
Exactly.
It's weird.
Yeah. So it was, the adults in the community were meditating 3 to 4 hours a day together. So it was a funny moment in time, and it's mellowed. So, but it was pretty intense. It was, it gave me kind of a perspective on spirituality and religion, and even self-improvement and the desire for people to always be kind of trying to transform, since so much of my childhood, I was surrounded by adults who were, trying to change their consciousness, trying to become enlightened. And so, yeah, there's a certain kind of, I wouldn't say cynicism anymore, but I definitely sort of am interested in it, but not a part of it.
Yeah, I think unfortunately, whenever there's people at the head of the, the movements, they're subject to being people and all people's frailties and everything. And a lot of times it seems to lead to bad behavior, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, there's a real direct line between that book and this next book, Sister Sinner. I finished working on Greetings from Utopia Park, and in the process, I had this sort of revelation about the guru that I grew up with, Maharishi, and, I'd always seen him as this sort of all-knowing, omniscient, almost godlike character. I mean, he was quoted back to me day and night for, more than a dozen years. And, in doing the research and reporting for that book, I was able to see more of his interior life and what his private life was like and get a sense of him as a regular person with his own desires and ambitions. It made me really curious about that experience, like what it's like. We always think about like, oh, we're watching somebody on the stage or we're watching somebody melt down, but what's it like to be on the stage? I mean, it's not something I have any interest in personally doing, but I think it's really interesting what happens to people who are in the public eye and who become these kind of prophetic figures that we deify.
Yeah, I thought it'd be funny. It wouldn't be an insult, but it would be. You go up to one and you say, "You're prophetic," and they're like, "What?"
I mean, try it. It's the ego gets.
I don't know if gurus like dad jokes, but
Yes. No, I I don't know if they do. I don't know if they do. I mean, but so Aimee Semple McPherson, who this book is about, she's really interesting because she was this really important and powerful religious leader, who should have been part of our history, but she started to make some really bad decisions when she was at the height of her fame. And, part of the story is that kind of breakdown that can happen to people when they're put in that position or they achieve that position.
Yeah, I'm sure it's tough. There's a lot of pressures, and I don't know if you should feel sorry for those people. I guess that's what they want, but yeah, I'm sure it's not all smiles and rainbows and easy stuff.
No, I mean, to me, being famous has always seemed like the worst curse,
Yeah. So what is the Sister Sinner book about? What was the context of that?
Yeah, so Aimee Semple McPherson was born just before the turn of the century, and she came to Los Angeles in the early, right after World War I, and in the early 1920s built the Angelus Temple, which is considered the first megachurch. And in 1924, she started one of the first Christian radio stations. And she was Pentecostal, which was a fairly new denomination. I mean, at that point, it probably would have been called a cult, but a fringe Christian religious movement that emphasized the gifts of the Holy Spirit, including speaking in tongues.
It's that new?
Yeah, it was 1906.
What's the other name for Pentecostal? Similar?
Charismatic?
Charismatic, yes. I see.
Yeah. Yeah, there's I think all Pentecostals are charismatic, but not all charismatics are Pentecostals. That might be the way it works. But yeah, so she converted to Pentecostalism as a 17-year-old in 1907, and she's just an incredibly important figure in the history of American religion and religion globally. I mean, at the time, Pentecostalism was fairly fringe, and her church today has 8 million members, but more importantly, there are 650 million charismatic and Pentecostal Christians in the world, and it's a quarter of the world's Christians, and that is it's the fastest growing religion. She helped shape the future of belief, and she's forgotten because at the height of her fame, she had this bizarre thing take place, Richard.
Okay.
Which I
sounds odd.
Yeah. So.
You're saving it for the book. You don't want it. Is that what?
No. I can say it. I didn't know if you wanted me to keep going.
Yeah. No. Yeah. Sure.
Yeah. So in May of 1926, at the height of her fame, she goes down to Venice Beach and is working on a sermon about light and darkness. And she sends her assistant away to make a phone call, and she goes down to the ocean where she swims laps, and then she vanishes. And it's like pandemonium, people are freaking out within hours and days. Tens of thousands of people are on the beach, searching for her, keeping vigil. 2 people die looking for her. It's a massive citywide search and news story. And right away, there's just like a lot of questions about what happened. Like, did she drown? Where did she go? Did she run away? And 35 days later, 600 miles away, she walks in from the desert of Mexico and she tells this kind of unbelievable story of being kidnapped. She used the term white slavery. She says she was kidnapped by the underworld to punish her for her, vocal sort of politics and evangelizing. And she comes back to Los Angeles, and very quickly the district attorney's office kind of pivots from trying to find the kidnappers to prosecuting her. So ultimately, she and her mother and her alleged lover / former employee and a woman who was a schizophrenic doppelganger of her that she had allegedly hired were charged with fraud and perjury. And it was the largest trial in Los Angeles' history until the Manson murders. And it's like, to understand how big and important it was, you could compare it to the OJ trial. Like, people have said it's like the OJ trial of the first half of the century.
Like Black Dahlia, that kind of stuff.
Yes. Yeah. It just was absolutely like riveted the city and the nation. I mean, it was front page news on the New York Times, Los Angeles Times. It was, people knew everything about her. So it also becomes this story of, this woman that in a lot of ways people should know. Like, she was a really foundational figure in American history and shaped a lot of the ways that people worship. She really basically created Christian entertainment. She, did these illustrated sermons and plays. People called her the P.T. Barnum of Christianity. She just would create these incredible spectacles. But she's forgotten because this scandal and these trials kind of made her a joke. Like, she became a point of mockery. And it's also this kind of cautionary tale on the back half of what happens to, as we were talking about, these religious leaders who sort of lose their way, and she kind of is almost devoured by her public. She really sort of falls apart.
Before we continue, I've been personally funding the Finding Genius podcast for 4.5 years now, which has led to 2,700 plus interviews of clinicians, researchers, scientists, CEOs, and other amazing people who are working to advance science and improve our lives and our world. Even though this podcast gets 100,000 plus downloads a month, we need your help to reach hundreds of thousands more worldwide. Please visit findinggeniuspodcast.com and click on Support Us. We have 3 levels of membership from $10 to $49 a month, including perks such as the ability to see ahead in our interview calendar and ask questions of upcoming guests, transcripts of podcasts you're interested in, the ability to request specific topics or guests, and more. Visit findinggeniuspodcast.com and click Support Us today. Now back to the show.
Interesting. How did you do the research for this story?
I had worked as an investigative reporter for years, so I went and obtained court records and trial papers. I did a ton of archival research in terms of newspapers, old sermons. There's a huge collection of her published materials. She was incredibly prolific. She wrote 6 or 7 memoirs in her lifetime. So, kind of an aggregation of all of that. And she's been written about over the last century. Like, every few decades, people kind of take her on. So that there's plenty of material about her.
Yeah, I just always wondered and was amazed that people could write, novels about historical figures. And I would guess the older the material, the harder and the less of it there is. But how difficult is that process? Like, what are some of the tough things about getting information about something that happened a while ago?
Yeah, I mean, it's tricky. I mean, one of the things I really enjoy doing as a journalist is being able to interview people. And in this story, everybody's dead. So number one, that.
But what about family? Like the grandchildren or something? Children want to be alive, but...
Yeah, there's a granddaughter or great-granddaughter who is in her late 90s who wouldn't talk. She had never met Aimee anyway, so it wasn't such a thing. There are, there are a fair amount of archives and interviews that were done with family members in the 70s and 80s that I had access to. So, that was helpful. You know, I mean, the newspapers were just absolutely obsessed with this story. So there's, you know, I mean, in 1926, I would say like half of the Los Angeles Times and half of the LA Examiner every day was dedicated to Aimee's story, at least during the summer.
Oh,
Fall. Yeah, I mean, it was just like a fixation. So there's even, you know, there's a lot of reporting and records in that of what was happening and all these crazy subplots. You know, I mean, it is this kind of, I don't know how you would describe it, like this cyclone in a way where just like more and more people got caught up in it, and there were like people who died and
like Epstein's Island, but different.
yes, exactly. Different. But, you know, I mean, there's like a blind lawyer who drowns in a ditch of like filled with a foot of water, and, you know, an abortion doctor who leaves burned papers in a trash can and is dead by suicide when the cops show up to interview him. You know, like it's just this incredible kind of,
Oh, so it is like Epstein Island. Okay. Yeah.
yeah, I know it is there is this kind of sense that the darkness, that there were a lot of untruths that spread across the city, and it's a crazy story.
Why did you write it? Did you feel like you had to, or it was just so interesting to you, or like, what was your motivation?
I mean, I had a couple of different motivations. One of them was I felt a little bit like this is a really important female figure in American history who's been forgotten. And part of why she's been forgotten is that she was flawed, that she made mistakes, that she was complicated. She wasn't just, you know, a role model. Like she did some really screwed up stuff. But at the same time, you know, she was an incredible pioneer and innovator. She did incredible outreach to the city of Los Angeles during the Great Depression. She fed over 1.5 million families. So just this really mixed bag, I would say. And I think that's important to kind of have in our collective memory and history, is somebody, especially a woman who, you know, has this insane ambition and success, but is also flawed. You know, I think it is.
I think Mother Teresa, very similar. She was
Mother Teresa, you know, we'll never talk about that, the Mother Teresa thing, but it is, you know, I think it kind of is par for the course. And
yeah, that's true.
And I think it kind of liberates people a little bit, you know, from these like perfect ideals of what you're supposed to be, or what success is supposed to look like.
And that's why I think cancer culture is so short-sighted. Like, who, you know, it's like they say in the Bible, you know, let he who is without sin cast the first stone. I know, I'm not saying everyone of stature, but a lot of people of stature are very mixed, you know, with Dave Ruth and Frank Sinatra and just anyone. I mean, you know, none of these people seem to be totally clean, Thomas Jefferson, whatever, and just say like, oh, I'll throw them away because of this one thing they did, and ignore all the other stuff they did. I think, again, it's short-sighted. So it's nice that you share this, you know?
No, and it's been really interesting. Like overall gotten like really wonderful, amazing reviews for the book, but there has been a little bit of this undercurrent and thread where people are frustrated with me for not condemning her for her mistakes. And I find it like a little bit of that kind of hot take. I don't want to say cancel culture, because that in itself has like become such a political term. But I think we have gotten, somehow through social media, we've gotten to this place where we really want to have things be on one side of the line or the other. Like you want to be right, wrong. And this was such an incredible case in that, you know, I think she made some really big mistakes, but also the people who were screaming at her and accusing her were making mistakes too. Like you just see how much the water is from 100 years later. And there's some clarity for me on that of like, I'm not going to be quite so convinced of my righteousness or people's lack of righteousness.
Yeah, well, how has it affected your faith? I mean, did you have faith before or after? Is it just another like ball of a guru to you? Like, how does this story change you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it has created some softening, which is also probably just coming with age. You know, I mean, when I left the spiritual community that I grew up in, I was pretty cynical, you know, and had a real sense of like, people in power are abusive, and, you know, people without power have been victimized. And while that is true, I think there's also a sense after working on this book of like, power has its own costs, there's ways in which it creates victims in and of itself. And I think people just being gentler with each other, I mean, that's what I feel like I've internalized from the story is like, we're at a point in the world where we're so divided politically and there's so much accusation of evil doing, that's a word that gets thrown around a lot. But I think, trying to be more empathetic, trying to connect with people on shared values, I can't figure out the way forward, but that seems like a start.
Okay. So do you feel like maybe it's made you more patient and more understanding of people, the good, the bad, the ugly?
I think I really try to, when I feel myself outraged, which seems to be the primary emotion from, consuming news and social media, outrage, I interrogate it a little more, I would say,
That's good.
And I think, and I'm trying to figure out a place that's sort of post outrage since it doesn't seem to be doing anything. And I grew up in like a quasi Hindu community, but I am from Iowa. Like I did grow up in a place that is like, it's a purple state. They voted for Obama twice and Trump twice. Like it's a place that's kind of a weird melting pot or a mix of American values. And so I think I did grow up with that sense of like, oh, you have to understand the other side because you live together, and that there's been some erosion of that, I think.
Well, you have a partner and stuff? Like, how is this? If so, like, how has this affected your relationship with your partner? Has it helped?
You mean in terms of the book or in terms of my sort of political feelings?
Well, like, Matt, your husband, wife, etc. Like personal life stuff. Has this improved? How you relate to your kids if you have, and a partner and stuff like that, or friends, or
yeah. I mean, it's a good question. I mean,
you don't have the answer. I was just curious if it related down to personal life in a good or a bad way.
Yeah, I mean, I've been married for 16 years, which is crazy.
Good for you. Right.
Yeah, and I have 2 daughters, and I think it's been helpful to have, especially during this really tumultuous time in the world, to have a really complex story to be invested in and to talk with them about. And I mean, history is actually just this incredible mirror to hold up as we want to understand our present moment. And I feel like as Americans, myself included, we have so little understanding of the past and we think of it as long ago. But I mean, I think if you read this book and you think about 1920s Los Angeles, it's incredibly contemporary feeling. And yet at that moment, yeah, Los Angeles was transforming from being like a sort of, dusty outpost at the end of the railroad line into the fastest growing city in the history of the world.
Wow. Oh, that's cool. You can tell your kids and your husband, now remember, mom is perfect. These people forget it. But, thank God mom's not like that,
Well, yeah. So I guess in answer to that question, I think I feel a little less defensive about my mistakes. I would say.
That's good.
Yeah. Writing about a woman who made such kind of wild swings for good and for bad, I think it has made me embrace that flawedness, like I'm not going to win it all. I'm not going to pretend like I'm winning at them all. And it isn't necessary. And I think that is a good message for kids.
Okay, yeah, excellent. Well, how long has the book been out now?
It's been out 3 weeks. Yeah.
Nice. Okay. So people can get it on Amazon and everywhere books are sold, is it?
Yes, everywhere where books are sold.
And you have the audiobook version?
Yeah, there's one. It's on Spotify and Audible.
Okay. Yeah, no, I mean, like I said, I can't speak for myself yet, but my wife loves it, and this sounds like a very fascinating story, so I think a lot of listeners will want to go listen.
I've told people it's like, even like my husband isn't particularly interested in religion, but he loves like The Wolf of Wall Street, like crazy ambition stories where like the cost of ambition, and this is 100% that.
Okay, well, very good. So I guess, you've told this through the book subtly, not so subtly, but is there any message you want for, people listening to the podcast, like before they've read it? Should they read it with a certain mindset or anything, or just go read the thing and, leave a review and then, see what they think about it?
I mean, sure, that would be great. I mean, think that I would embrace the contradictions in the story, like to not try and decide whether you think she is good or bad, but just think about why she's making the decisions that she is, because it's much more interesting than just passive judgment.
Okay. Well, very cool. Well, thanks so much for coming on the podcast and for authoring the book, giving people something really interesting to look into,
Yeah, thank you, Richard, and I'm honored to be a part of this.
Excellent.
If you like this podcast, please click the link in the description to subscribe and review us on iTunes.
You've been listening to the Finding Genius podcast with Richard Jacobs. If you like what you hear, be sure to review and subscribe to the Finding Genius podcast on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. And want to be smarter than everybody else? Become a premium member at findinggeniuspodcast.com. This podcast is for information only. No advice of any kind is being given. Any action you take or don't take as a result of listening is your sole responsibility. Consult professionals when advice is needed.
Remember, mom is perfect. These people forget it. But, thank God mom's not like that,
Well, yeah. So I guess in answer to that question, I think I feel a little less defensive about my mistakes. I would say,
That's good.
yeah, writing about a woman who made such kind of wild swings for good and for bad, I think it has made me embrace that flawedness, like I'm not going to win it all. I'm not going to pretend like I'm winning at them all. And it isn't necessary. And I think that is a good message for kids.
Okay, yeah, excellent. Well, how long has the book been out now?
It's been out 3 weeks. Yeah.
Nice. Okay. So people can get it on Amazon and everywhere books are sold, is it?
Yes. Everywhere where books are sold.
And you have the audiobook version?
Yeah. There's one. It's on Spotify and Audible.
Okay. Yeah, no, I mean, like I said, I can't speak for myself yet, but my wife loves it. And this sounds like a very fascinating story. So I think a lot of listeners will want to go listen.
I've told people it's like, even like my husband isn't particularly interested in religion. But he loves like The Wolf of Wall Street, like crazy ambition stories where like the cost of ambition. And this is 100% that.
Okay. Well, very good. So I guess, you've told it through the book subtly, not so subtly, but is there any message you want for, people listening to the podcast, like before they've read it? Should they read it with a certain mindset or anything, or just go read the thing and, leave a review and then, see what they think about it?
I mean, sure, that would be great. I mean, I think that I would embrace the contradictions in the story, like to not try and decide whether you think she is good or bad, but just think about why she's making the decisions that she is, because it's much more interesting than just passive judgment.
Okay. Well, very cool. Well, thanks so much for coming on the podcast and for authoring the book, giving people something really interesting to look into,
Yeah, thank you, Richard, and I'm honored to be a part of this.
Excellent.
If you like this podcast, please click the link in the description to subscribe and review us on iTunes.
You've been listening to the Finding Genius podcast with Richard Jacobs. If you like what you hear, be sure to review and subscribe to the Finding Genius podcast on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. And want to be smarter than everybody else? Become a premium member at findinggeniuspodcast.com. This podcast is for information only. No advice of any kind is being given. Any action you take or don't take as a result of listening is your sole responsibility. Consult professionals when advice is needed. And subscribe to the Finding Genius podcast on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. And want to be smarter than everybody else? Become a premium member at findinggeniuspodcast.com. This podcast is for information only. No advice of any kind is being given. Any action you take or don't take as a result of listening is your sole responsibility. Consult professionals when advice is needed. Your sole responsibility. Consult professionals when advice is needed.